So Sylvia, let's go back to you. I know that when Natasha or when Marieke was talking about timelines and adherence to the regulations, she mentioned your name at one point. Did you have anything you wanted to add to anything that she had said earlier?
So I think the operational planning part is an important dimension here, and so it has already been touched on a few different ways. There's the sort of the strategy in terms of planning to optimize and balance risk and speed. There's also the resourcing component, and as Marieke had touched on, we have two processes happening sort of in parallel, and so there is quite a bit of a there's the shift that is happening in anticipation and preparation for transitioning all studies to work through the new system. But currently, there are studies that are underway as you are planning on transitioning into the new system. And so part of that too is working through the resource needs to work through both at the same time, which may somewhat have influenced the poll responses of folks are working in that direction, but not quite ready to fully adopt it until next year.
All right, perfect. A couple folks, when they registered, had asked about country activation cycle times, something I'm not very familiar with, but I'm hoping you can share some insights or thoughts that you have on that.
Sure. Right. So currently when we do operational planning, that is one aspect that we factor in related to the study needs, the requirements, and so forth, among many, many other factors. But typically we think about country activation cycle time as a time from final protocol to getting that first site activated in a country. And with this new regulation, that really does change the way that we think about potential site activation, country activations, and ultimately site activation within a country. Because as had been mentioned already by Thomas, we are currently working in a decentralized process, meaning that we submit to individual countries and open them up and sometimes on a rolling basis. Whereas now there's a potential to consider a much broader geography, especially countries that historically had a slower startup cycle time. Those potentially could be opened faster because of this new regulation, the ability to do a unified submission. And so that's really an interesting thing to evaluate now, as has already been touched on. It creates opportunities in lots of different ways. So it can opportunities to consider a wider or different geographic footprint in Europe. That creates obviously opportunities to involve more or different European countries in clinical trials, really in line with what Marieke mentioned in the beginning, which is that really was sort of the objective, is to increase the amount of trial activity in Europe. And so certainly that is one potential benefit here. The other one that I think is also important and that was also touched on is related to patient access to clinical trials. So if it is easier to open up a country that historically might have been more challenging because it took longer to open it, that also creates opportunities for more patients to gain access to those clinical studies that are evaluating novel therapies that could potentially benefit them. So there's that benefit potentially as well, in addition to the potential to address some of the diversity objectives that we're trying to get more folks involved from more diverse populations.
Okay, and Diane just asked the question, what resources are needed for the transition, i.e. which departments? Since you're our pharma rep, I'm going to let you go ahead and take care of that one. Can you talk about generally which departments in the company should be working on this or involved with it?
Right, so from an operational planning and feasibility perspective, right there, really this is truly cross-functional and involves R&D across the board. So when you think about all the topics already touched on in terms of submissions, there's a lot of scientific submissions and working with CTIS platforms. So you need your IT folks, et cetera, to be able to get the content in, coordination across different functions in terms of medical writing, to make sure that the documents are prepared and ready to be submitted, depending on the way a organization may be set up, whether they are outsourced, whether they're running their own studies. There may be support from your partner CRO that may be supporting in various ways here. And from an operational planning, there's a tremendous amount of coordination among the study teams themselves, with feasibility teams, site and study startup teams, clinical trial execution, those sorts of areas. a lot of coordination